Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us virtually and in the live audience here. We're going to jump right in pretty quickly. Dr. Zogby let us in very well. We're talking about responding to a moral crisis in leadership, and he rightfully mentioned that it's kind of an oxymoron. You were supposed to have the amazing Sunita Jackson moderating. You're stuck with me. Sorry, not sorry. But very quickly, so we can get into the important part of this conversation, I'm just going to tell you who we're joined by. Dr. Cornel West, who of course does not need an introduction. And Mehrsa Baradaran, who's the author and professor at Northwestern University. And she's authored 2 amazing books, How the Other Half Banks and The Color of Money. And I hear that there's another book in the works, but, oh, it's out. Oh, it's out in May. Okay, y'all, you're getting it here. And then very honored to share the stage, too, with Dwight McKee, who I was just given kind of a quick rundown. OG Rainbow Push, Dwight McKee. He shared that you cut the ribbon on this building. So amazing. So very excited to have everybody here with us today to have this very important conversation. We've been talking about it throughout the day. We've been talking about, there's no word strong enough. It's a nightmare that we're seeing unfold before our eyes. And the lack of courage, we'll say, by some, moral clarity, by so many, by the White House on down. Of course, there are exceptions. But for the most part, we're waiting for folks to step up in a real way. And it shouldn't be, we hear this a lot, shouldn't be radical to call for a ceasefire. That's the minimum, right? This is a baseline moment, and yet for some reason, for so many, it feels impossible. And why is that? Why is it so difficult? Why is it that Palestinian lives don't matter the way that other lives do? This is what we want to dive into today. And how do we respond to this deadly silence? So we're just going to open with some remarks from each of our panelists, and then we'll move into a little bit of Q&A. So, Dwight, I'd love to start with you.
Thank you. What I want to do is put in context what a profound opportunity this is and where we are historically there, and how providential this meeting is. At the turn of the century, the last century, 20th century, a guy by the name of Julius Rosenwald, who's the chairman of the board of Sears and Roebuck, who comes out of this church, out of this synagogue. This was a temple. He and Booker T. Washington and Jane Addams, Robert Taylor, Robert Johnson, they put together an ecumenical group of women, blacks, white, Jews, Protestants, and they said they would make a calculated effort to pick up where the Freedmen's Bureau had left off. Freedmen's Bureau had been jammed by the Hayes Compromise, Kill Reconstruction, and so black people coming out of slavery was just kind of in limbo. And they decided they would bring us into the 20th century. And so they began to focus on areas like agriculture with George Washington Carver, Tuskegee, education. They built 7,000 colleges, schools, 7,000 schools. Culture. They put together the Harlem Renaissance, funded it. Civil rights and politics. They funded the Urban League. They funded the NAACP. Housing, they built the Rosenwald housing as a prototype as what public housing should look like. They decided that they would pick up, coming out of this building, on everything that the Freedmen's Bureau was designed to do. It had gone bankrupt. And they would make a calculated effort with an ecumenical movement to pull us into the 20th century. Ironically enough, 50 years later, in this same building, Reverend Jackson, picking up on a mandate from Dr. King and from Leon Sullivan, decided to start a movement to replicate that, to pull us out of the crashing of the Great Society. The war had drained the money out of the Great Society. And so what Reverend Jackson decided to do is to put together like an economic movement and pull together a coalition of groups: Arabs, blacks, Jews, women. He called his the Rainbow Coalition, with the same intention to pull us back into the economy. So we focused on things, on politics. We focus on economic development. We focus on education, Push Excel, and said we would take us from 1970 to 2000. Out of that grew, in that movement grew, the first challenge to the country for the right of Palestinians to coexist in a country that they had been living in for generations, that had been extracted from them. And because the power of some of the groups, particularly the Zionist groups, it was taboo even to raise the question of justice for the Palestinian nation. And Jackie Jackson and Jesse Jackson, to their credit, as he ran for president, kicked against the grain and put that on the table. We now have an opportunity in this same building, ironically enough, providentially enough, to take that up a level and reconnect and reinvigorate those coalitions that fell apart coming out of things like Baki, coming out of some other issues we had over the years. We now are in a position that we could take the energy of this new group, young Jews, young Arabs, young students, correlate them to what we historically have done in the civil rights movement, and take the energy and the courage and the vitality of that movement and marry it to the strategy, the historicity, and the experience of our group. So what we want to share with you all as we put these relationships together are the strategies that work for us. We weren't just a protest group. We were a fight and knock them out. We were a cut us in or cut it out crowd. Dr. King defined us as a beloved community. Because you're a beloved community don't mean you have to be a powerless community. And so what we did is we took our resources and our arrogance and identified all of the companies that was hostile to us and picketed and fought and put them out of business. There was a company called A&P. A&P meant Atlantic and Pacific. They went from sea to shining sea. When we finished with them, it was, oh, say, can you see? And the answer was, no, you could not, because we put them out of business. My charge to us as we put these relationships together is we share that experience with you all, and we can define those companies, those corporations, those lobby groups that are hostile to us, that are creating these policies, and go heads up with them. We got, you all have, or we have not, advantage of an internet, so these boycotts can go international. It's enough of us that we identify some of these companies, we can run them out of business. We can tell the Koch brothers, we ain't buying no more tissue paper. We ain't buying no more toilet paper. If y'all are funding things against our interests, then it's in our interest to put y'all out of business. And so I think what we're gonna try to come out of this with is a working coalition that is both defensive and offensive. We will picket, but we will humble. And we will put together, we had a guy here by the name of Ed Reddick. What Ed Reddick did is all he did all day is identify companies that we was gonna put out of business, and we did. And so we wanna come out of that with that kind of coalition to look at these companies that are anti-us, and we pay them a price. There needs to be consequences tied to injustice, and they don't have all of the power. And so we're gonna look at a change of attitude and a change of disposition and go both from defense to offense there, and share our experiences with this newfound energy and this newfound coalition.
Thank you so much, Dwight. I got excited. Who's excited? Yes. Mehrsa, I'm gonna kick it over to you.
I have a dilemma because I have a lot to say, and Cornel West is my intellectual hero, so I am lucky in that I speak very fast. So one of the things, I will always speak fast, but I was born in 1978, right before the 8-year war between Iraq. I was born in Iran, and it was nightly raids and bombs at night, and we would sleep in our basements with gas masks, and the Iraqis would put gas weapons on civilians, and Iran tried to get it vetoed, tried to get it as a war crime at the UN, and the US vetoed that. And then I immigrated to America when I was 9, and grew up here as a person who thought that the way that we spoke about the Middle East in this country was crazy. I was in New York during 9/11, went to law school right after, and at NYU, and we couldn't speak about, was not supporting the troops, not supporting America, to say, why are we bombing Iraq, right? So I also want to put a silver lining on what's happening right now, because I have never seen people in this country talk about Gaza, Palestine, the entire Middle East in the way that they're speaking about it now. There are 13-year-olds on TikTok doing foreign policy better than I've ever heard on CNN. And the beauty of focusing on Gaza and learning just a little bit about the Suez Canal, go into a little bit of deep history, is that the whole thing unravels. You're at empire, you're at the justification of borders, the myth of democratized nations, governing by the consent of the governed, right? You're talking about American empire as soon as you're, 2 layers deep into that onion. So Gaza, I think, is, in the way that George Floyd was a moment where, for those in the know, knew that this injustice was happening. And I think George Floyd opened up a lot of eyes, unfortunately, in the way that it happened, but that video was undeniable. And in that same way, Gaza could be the last war if we can really just look at it, because that is war, anywhere that it is, okay? And it's children in their basements at night, and I'm still, going to therapy, trying to figure out my anxiety, and it turns out it was forged in those, basement nights. That's how it works, right? You traumatize a generation, and you can choose what to do with that trauma. And a lot of people choose violence. And that's exactly what we're in. It's this constant cycling of our own trauma. And so when Dr. King and Muhammad Ali and Cornel West and Push talk about nonviolence, and not as a means to an end, I feel like nonviolence is the core moral principle, that if we are not committed to just without exception, then we're lost. So I think this conflict, and I think conflict is not the right word. It's like when you say racial conflict and it's a cop on a neck of a black man, that is not a racial conflict. This is not a Middle Eastern conflict. This is a genocide. And so if we're fighting, it's just important that our revolution include everybody. And I think this is what Gaza is showing us, because Gaza has been, or Palestine has been and this is Mark Lamott's Hill book, everything except for Palestine. You could be progressive, talk about everything, but you gotta put a little caveat in for the terrorists, right? And so you weaponize people and regions, and if your revolution has people who are exempt from it, or women, right? Yes, liberation for all, but someone's got to go do that, and it's got to be the women, right? If it doesn't include everyone, it's not a revolution. It's just negotiating with the machine that will take you anyway, right? So if you're silencing yourself because you're going to get punished by that thing is going to punish. That thing only knows how to punish, and it's not a group of people. It is a power system rooted in fear that is turned into violence. So I will say one last thing, because I really do want to hear Dr. West more than I want to hear myself. I was looking out, I haven't been in snow in a while. I live in California now. I've lived in Georgia before that. I'm from New York, but it's been a while since I've seen snow. And I was at the top of my hotel looking at these snowflakes that were coming in big. And I just was thinking about this and the wave of movements. Each of these snowflakes is this like delicate, the famous term of like, oh, don't be a snowflake, right? It's this delicate, unique, crystalline piece of water kind of floating and dancing around in space. But then you put them all together and they shut down a city, right? They will ground your airplanes, stop your cars, shut down your institutions. And that is the way of these things. Like, we are all snowflakes, and you join together and we can do a lot. We will shut it down. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You said a lot of really important things that we're going to come back to, actually. So thank you so much. Dr. West, take it away.
Well, I'm just so very, very blessed to be here. I want to salute each and every one of you, not only those who sit here in the pews, but even those who are watching through the technology. I'm so glad you started with Iran, though. That's a rare thing. And we need to be able to be morally consistent when we're talking about people who are undergoing subjugation and domination in this sense. It could be Muslims in China. It could be gays and lesbians in Uganda. It could be brothers and sisters on the south side and the west side of Chicago. Now, I always believe any serious talk about the quest for truth and justice and beauty too, you got to begin with yourself. What are you willing to bear? What cost are you really willing to pay? My dear brother Dwight McKee, he's my mentor. He's my teacher. He's been at it now for almost 60 years with Brother Jesse and Brother Jackie, consecrating this place. And look at him standing tall, given the cost that he's borne, given the burden that he's been willing to bear. That makes a difference, you all. That makes a big, big difference. So I begin with myself. I just happened to drop in space and time in the greatest tradition of modern time, which is black music as expression and black freedom struggle on the ground. Now, what do you mean by that, Brother West? That sounds very chauvinistic. Well, let me give you some evidence. We can't even talk about why we're in this space unless we come to terms with the fact that it's very rare to find people who for 400 years have been so chronically hated every day, every month, every year, and keep dishing out love warriors like Martin King and like Fannie Lou Hamer and like Jesse Jackson and like Jackie Jackson, and we haven't even got to John Coltrane's Love Supreme yet. What is it about these particular African peoples who have at our best a habitual vision of moral and spiritual greatness? And somewhere I read, he and she is greatest among you will be your servant, who will keep track of the least of these, who will be willing to tell the truth, and condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak. And justice is what love looks like in public. So in the face of terror, we're not going to call for terrorizing others. We want freedom for everybody. Thank you, Frederick Douglass. Thank you, Harriet Tubman. We on the way to Gaza. 2023, but let's historically situate this thing. Traumatized people. Rhymefest knows, look at him, part of that same tradition. Wounded healer rather than wounded herder, choosing to be a wounded healer. All of these wounds and scars and bruises, what will we choose to do? We want to attempt to heal in our deeds and in our actions, and sometimes it's only a song and other times it's just a grin and a hug. But you see, this is concrete, this is lived experience, this is not abstract discourse about genocide. Turn to December 17th, 1951, where a towering figure named Paul Robeson walked over to the United Nations and handed the United Nations a petition that we charge genocide against black people. The same moment William Patterson was presenting the United Nations in Paris, we charge genocide. That same Paul Robeson was what? Under house arrest at 4645 Walnut Street, living in his sister's house. But he was the most famous Negro in 1939 in the world. What a price he's willing to pay. What a burden he's willing to bear. William Patterson couldn't make it back home. They took his passport. Who else was with him? Du Bois was there. Claudia Jones was there. Thelma Dell Perkins, she's the AKA sister, revolutionary stone to the bone. She was there. These were voices that were cutting against the grain of a consensus where people couldn't even raise the issue of neo-slavery, of Jim and Jane Crow, of lynching every 2.5 days. America acted as if, as Reinhold Niebuhr put it in his preface for The Irony of American History, I love Reinhold, but he could be wrong. Just like I love Bernie, Brother John, and I'm always love Bernie, but he's wrong on this. Oh, he needs to come out stronger, but that's all right. We all are cracked vessels. We all cracked vessels. We need to understand that. We need to have some humility when we disagree with people, especially when we have overlap. But that we charge genocide, that would then, for the first time in the history of the United Nations, just founded 6 years earlier, generate what? An international spotlight on a crime against humanity. They went through 10,000 cases. 152 black folk had been killed in 2.5 days, and over 344 had been violated within the last 3.5 years. That's what's in that we charge genocide. 1951, 4 years before Rosa Parks sat on a bus in order to stand up for justice. Meaning what? We have to be courageous, consistent to say we are not going to put up with any silence when it comes to the oppression and subjugation or domination of anybody, no matter how unpopular it might make you. Oh, yes. And so I've been very blessed for the last 42 years. Edward Zaid and a host of others of us been raising the issue of the Palestinian question. Brother Zogby, God bless him, he knows the struggles we had on the platform committee in the Democratic Party. We couldn't even get the use of the word occupation. Please. Edward Zaid, you all know the great Edward Zaid, the towering public intellectual, Palestinian freedom fighter, of the last 50 years. He and I used to march in front of the New York Times just to get them to use the word occupation rather than disputed territories. That's what it means to have an empire that's predicated on the efficacy of lies. And those lies hide crimes. And when it becomes so chronic over time, it moves from war crime to crime against humanity to crime of genocide. Ask our indigenous peoples that. They already know. Ask black people that. We have a different version, but we already know. But for those who have been willing to raise their voices, what usually happens to them? Character assassination, literal assassination, misunderstood, misconstrued. Even your own community is taught somehow that you are so far outside of the mainstream, you're not worthy of being listened to. You're just a canary in the mine, and sooner or later those chickens gonna come home to roost. Sooner or later, you're gonna reap what you sow. In the American empires, the 68th empire of the 70 empires that emerged from the caves of Africa. Every empire comes and goes, and most empires begin to decay and decline when there's military overreach. 800 military troops around the world. Special operations in 100 countries. What one nation needs that unless you are obsessed with total dominance of the world? How arrogant. Hubris. I come out of a revolutionary Christian tradition which says what? As Martin put it, God says, I'll break your power. All of that arrogance, all of that haughtiness, all of that indifference to the treatment of the least of these, the vulnerable ones, no matter what color, no matter what gender, no matter what sexual orientation or national identity. We're talking morality and spirituality here. And it's hard to talk morality and spirituality in a moment of such overwhelming barbarity. Barbarity blinds. People get paranoid, distrustful, don't want to listen, don't want to argue, don't want to disagree, just entrenched in the hounds of hell, in the language of the great Howard Thurman, the teacher, Brother Martin King. Organized greed, institutionalized hatred, and routinized indifference to the vulnerable. Rabbi Heschel is right. Indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. And we have to shatter the callousness and that indifference. And that's why this gathering is crucial, but also consistent. Also consistent. The problem is that in the last 45 years or so, we got so many leaders, especially black leaders. I'm talking about chocolate folk today, because I got some words for some vanilla folk, but we'll save that for later. But I'm talking about chocolate folk that come out of great traditions. Bobby Lewis, the father, the son of Ramsey Lewis. Where is he? My God, there he is. Do you know who Ramsey Lewis was? Ain't no just piano player. He sustained my soul in the way the Curtis Mayfields of the world and the Hutchinson sisters of the emotions of the world. We're not talking about just entertainers. That's why Brother Jesse Jackson was with Canon Adderley, with Roberta Flack, with the artists, because he understood he's coming from a hated people, a terrorized people, a traumatized people who need spiritual power and moral vision so they can sustain themselves with courage and integrity and honesty before the worms get their bodies. And look at Brother Jesse there now, still looking so good. Give it up for our brother. Still moving, still in the movement, still telling the truth, bringing us together to say genocide is wrong, ethnic cleansing is wrong, apartheid is wrong. We want a ceasefire. We want to end the siege. We want to end the occupation. Brother Jesse, we love you, man. Oh, we love you. No, I hold off. I want to just give him a hug, but he knows how much I love him. But partly because he's a wave in a great ocean. And all of us who choose to be a wave in that great ocean, it can go back to Helena Irene. That's family, community, church, some mosque, some temple, but church for us, black church, black music, that's not just empty words. That's the very stuff that preserves our dignity and our sanity in a world that seems to be so overwhelmed by hatred and fear and greed. And we do it with style and a smile. And he's still smiling. Look at him. He's still smiling. Emergency at Gaza. Thank Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes III for his leadership in coming in. And the important thing is, we got to stick together. We have to have solidarity at the very deepest level. That's crucial. And I don't believe in allies. You're either in the struggle or you're not. You see, Miles Davis didn't turn to Bill Evans, a white brother, on the piano and say, okay, ally, play your solo. No, he's in the Mother So-and-so band. You're either in the band or you're not. You're in the movement or you're not. You're going to give it all or you're not. Now, you come in humble because Bill Evans had to learn some things from Red Garland. But Red Garland learned some things from Bill Evans. And therefore, we're in it together because we got a moral and spiritual vision that lures the best of us, no matter what our background is, no matter where we come from. And that's what's made the difference. And that's why Rainbow Push, 84, 88, 2003, in coalition with a whole host of other groups. Now, no one institution has a monopoly, just like no one party has a monopoly on truth and beauty. And the politics comes later. If you haven't got yourself together morally and spiritually, and everybody falls short, but if you haven't got it together, then the politics are going to be very, very vacuous because you're not going to be in it for a long time. You're a sprinter rather than a long distance runner. And so here we've got to be long distance runners for our brothers and sisters in Gaza and the West Bank, just like we have to be for oppressed people all around the world. Thank you all so very much for taking so much time, but I know we want to.
Woo, my goodness. Thank you, Dr. West. I'm going to open it up to some questions in just a moment, but I am going to take a little point of privilege because you talked about something, Mehrsa, that I think is so important and not discussed enough. I promise it won't take long. But you talked about working through the trauma. You talked about young generations. And the thing that this is exhausting work. It's an exhausting existence. And so often we are made to believe that we just have to power through. And then it sneaks up on us sometimes in some ways. If you're okay with it, we didn't talk about this ahead of time, so I apologize for putting you on the spot. But I would love for you to share any words about, I mean, especially there's so, as Dwight mentioned and you mentioned and Dr. West mentioned, this is an intersectional time. There's a lot of young people, there's so many people, and we don't want to see people falling out because they're exhausted, which is understandable.
So I want to say a couple of things. One is what Dr. West just said about morality and spirituality being before, but not, you can do them in tandem. It's just that morally and spiritually, you do have to be there before you can do politics, because it's going to get twisted if you're not morally certain about what you are standing for. And that better be the dignity of every human being, and that like there's no difference between us. And until you're there, then you know, you're going to get used by some group or another. The other thing is on the individual level. I mean, I joke, and I shouldn't maybe because I don't have enough therapy, but like I joke about I'm going to write a book saying like, you know, protest as therapy. Like I actually do think solidarity and movement and action is sort of the balm for our spiritual crisis, rather than solipsism and a lot of self-talk, because we can't be calm and peaceful and meditative as long as children are dying in Gaza. We are the same being. So if one part of us is dying, how can I calm myself? And you can cope, and we do cope by going higher and seeking that authority from above. But I don't think we can live in a world where some of us are mentally healthy while an arm of us is killing. It's not possible.
Thank you so much. I am going to open it up, and if you could, just to keep us kind of on track and moving on time, if you could just direct your question to a specific person. I think that's Liam there with a mic. Thank you, my friend, always. There's somebody right here on the end, right over in front. Yep.
Yes, thank you all very much. This question is directed at Dr. Cornel West and everyone else. We'd really like to hear your opinion of the incredibly important significance of the Republic of South Africa's genocide charge against Israel and what you think we need to do here to support it.
Beautiful question, no, brother. Very much so. That I had called for bringing the state of Israel before the ICC as individuals a number of weeks ago, and said it would be fascinating to have a nation bring it before the ICJ, because ICC is individual, ICJ is nations. And lo and behold, South Africa stepped forward. I said, ooh. So the first thing we do is, I'm in solidarity with you. We're going to cast a global limelight on this crime of genocide. We're going to raise our voices publicly, not just here at PUSH, not just this weekend in Washington, D.C., but in the context of our everyday lives, talking to people why this is significant in terms of a moral and spiritual consistency. Meaning what? Are we against the genocide of Tutus? Are we against the genocide of Jewish brothers? Are we against the genocide of Armenians? We can go right across the board. Belgian Congo, right across the board. Genocide is an indescribable crime against humanity. And the least one could do is have some kind of accountability of it. And so for me, it's just a matter of continually bringing that issue in each context in which I find myself.
Up here on the, yep.
Thank you. Minister T.J. Williams, in care with the American Baptist Churches. One of the things that I've been doing when meeting with folks on TikTok is that we have been intentional about language. So when talking about the violence and the genocide, talking about who is committing the genocide, that it is European, Israeli Zionists. That language is so, because language is so important. So how do we get the message out to change the narrative and to change the language so that we are no longer shut down by being called anti-Semitic, by having money taken away, by having our jobs taken away, by CNN using this language in villainizing our Palestinian brothers and sisters. So how do we change the language and the narrative in saying being against the genocide is being against, as people of color, being against white supremacy and European Israeli Zionism? You're welcome. Blessing.
Thank you so much. I'm going to kick that question over to Mr. McKee over here to answer.
Yeah, they're not going to change the language. The language is their strategy. They're not going to change the narrative. The narrative is their strategy. And so what we have to do is understand that the language is designed to neutralize any reaction, any protest, any counter strategy. So what we have to do is create out our own narrative and our own machine for the dispensation of truth and information. The only antidote to lies and propaganda is truth. It takes the truth to set you free. Only the truth can set you free. And if people don't want you to know the truth, it's because they don't want you to be free. And so we have to create our own narrative and our own disposition of the narrative, our own media outlets.
Just jump in. Did you want to say a quick? But it's very important, though, brother, to keep in mind just how narrow multiculturalism can be. Because you got Brother Lloyd and you've got Sister Linda representing the American empire on television, beautiful black faces, wrong as two left shoes, well adjusted to injustice, well accommodating to a genocidal assault. They had the same challenge in 1949 when they went to Paris. Who was there? Ralph Bunche was there. He was the ambassador. Ralph Bunche won the Nobel Prize for the 1948 diplomatic process, right? So this is where skin pigmentation, it doesn't cut deep enough in terms of these issues of morality and spirituality. Sister Nina know what I'm talking about. So it's true that it's white supremacist because the American empire itself is, at its worst, we're not talking about its best now, at its worst is an extension of white supremacist legacies that come from Europe, right? But even Israel itself is multicultural. You got Sephardic Jewish brothers and sisters. You got Jewish brothers and sisters who are light-skinned. They all don't look like Albert Einstein, who was always calling for coexistence and not domination. He's against Jabotinsky. He's against Netanyahu. There's Judah Magnus. There's HaHakaham. There's a rich Jewish tradition of voices that are calling for coexistence, not just domination. And even that group can be multicolored. You see, gangsters come in all colors. And freedom fighters come in all colors. But I still hear your point about the tilt of it. Oh, yeah.
I'm going to add also that it is a war of words in a way, but I think the way to surpass it is through music and poetry and just playing around with different words. But as far as like how do you define what we're against, I think it is very clear at this point. We're not against. There is no, like I said, no exceptions. No human being gets left behind in this struggle, and that includes every person who is in Israel, right? Every person who is acting out their trauma, the mullahs in Iran also. There has to be a way for us to give people amnesty for the crimes that they've committed while recognizing the horrors of empire and white supremacy that we've never acknowledged. All of these laws, the UNHCR, the Geneva Conventions, the rules against torture, the idea of a war crime came after World War II when the Nazis tried to do to Europe what Europe had done to Africa and South America and the Middle East. And people got, well, we can't have war, and so now we're going to do these laws. Laws aren't going to save us. Institutions aren't going to save us. Our fight is against ideologies and institutions and systems of power, but not against people. It cannot be against people. And we also can't have heroes. We can't follow people into, off cliffs. It is all of us together or not.
Thank you. Gosh, that was perfect cherry on top. Absolutely. I am honored to, actually, this is going to be the last question. Apologies. I know we ran out of time quickly, but it's right that the final question comes from the Reverend Jesse Jackson. And his question is, for each of you, what is the path to ceasefire? How do we get there? So I'm going to start with you, Dwight, and we'll go on down the line.
You fight. We have to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. We have to bring power to the powerless. That was Jesus' charge to us, is that these people are in a situation where they are literally being slaughtered as if they're sheep. And not that they don't have the will to fight, but look at what they're up against. You have rocks against bombs. And so we are in a unique situation in that we are in the belly of the beast. We are paying the money that they're using to supply these bombs to those people. And so the way you cut off the activities to cut off the supply source. because we are here and based here, we have the influence and the power to arrest those people who are supplying these bombs and that are co-signing on this genocide. But unless we understand that we have more power than we understand that we have, then we will continue to think that they're insurmountable and they can't be beaten. And so it really starts with our self-concept. One of the things Reverend Jackson started with us when we really started this movement is that he started with, I am somebody. The reason he started with I am somebody is because we had to first change our self-concept in order to graduate to be able to fight the enemy. We had to believe that we were as legitimate as they were and had as much power as they did. So we have to see ourselves now as our own army and charged with fighting those in power, fighting those who control the means of production, fighting these warmongers in behalf of people who are in a situation where they right now can't fight for themselves.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Can't watch the Gaza, I just can't engage on that time scale because it does feel like every day more children are dying. And so the imam today at lunch talked about, look, time, you have to have a different concept of time when it comes to justice, and I have to think that. But also going back to the femaleness of it, there was early on in the war protests that I saw that didn't get much coverage of Israeli women and Palestinian women fighting together because it's their sons and their daughters and their, fathers and husbands out there, and I just have wanted a liberatory struggle of women across the Middle East. I mean, the Women Life Freedom movement was so stunning to watch. These are 13-year-old girls, unarmed, throwing themselves into this machine of the mullahs, which is Hamas, like a pox on all their houses. I mean, truly. And I don't know what that takes, but I do believe in women. I mean, we're the first generation of women who have been able to have freaking jobs and to vote, to have anything that looks like real voice and power. And so I think that that has to be an answer in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, that's real. And that Persian tradition that you and my beloved wife, Hanahita, got Rumi and Hafiz and all these other powerful poetic figures are in form. But I really do believe that the black musical tradition is very important here. You begin with catastrophe. The reason why the ceasefire is crucial and the reason why we do fight and hit the street or go to jail is because it's not a problem, it's a catastrophe. And the first move of corporate media is to act as if it's just one moment with all these different stories and look at all these problems in the world. Wait a minute. Catastrophes are different than just problems. And all you have to do is wait until the catastrophe comes to your house. Then all of a sudden, everybody wants to get militant. Everybody wants organization. Everybody wants solidarity. Oh, but no, it's been a catastrophe over here for a long time. With indigenous peoples and black peoples and poor peoples and so forth. So the catastrophe has to be acknowledged. Then it has to be artistically transfigured so it does not have the last word. That's what the blues is. Catastrophe, lyrically expressed, artistically transfigured, so that the blues condition does not lead to your depression. It leads to you singing the blues. So you got to uplift. You got power in the face of the catastrophe. Then, different conception of time. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Duke Ellington was saying, dissonance is a way of life for oppressed people. You got to learn how to live in the minor key. Under the note, around the note, on top of the note, flattening the note, a different conception of time that authorizes the future that not enough people can see in the present. And then improvisation. You got to be flexible enough that you have a variety of different strategies, and Brother Jesse knows this better than anybody else. So you got to work inside with these politicians, too often corrupt and cowardly, but you got to work with them, and you work outside, and you got to work with all these different groups for coalition, for rainbow, improvisationally, and yet still in the end knowing that no matter how bad it gets, how ugly it is, no evil should surprise us, no despair can paralyze us. We going down swinging like Ella Fitzgerald, Muhammad Ali, and Hank Aaron, swinging, hitting home runs when it looked as if you couldn't even get to the batter's box. Oh, what a people oppressed folk can be. And what a people who poured so much in me. A great black folk who now reconvene to talk about these great Palestinian brothers and sisters and to pull out these great Jewish young brothers and sisters building on the best of their prophetic Judaism, or the great socialists and communists building on the best of their secular traditions, or the bell hooks building on the best of Buddhism, or those coming out of Gandhi building on the best of prophetic Hinduism. It is a love supreme. That's what we're talking about.
This, and I'll close with this, is that, but it starts with self-concept. The Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. I love the black church, because we used to open up with the choir, and the choir would march out and they would say, we are soldiers in the army. We got to fight, although we got to die. We got to hold up the bloodstained banner. We got to hold it up until we die. We saw ourselves as Christian soldiers on a mission for God. It starts with your self-concept. And we have to believe we have the power that God has given us to fight a fight that he has assigned us to fight.
Thank you all so much. Please thank our panel here. We're going to take a